I was Martha, a devout Christian, a retired school teacher, and the kind of woman who prided herself on doing everything right. I thought I knew God, thought my spotless reputation and Bible quoting faith made me safe. But the night I died, everything I believed shattered. I didn't see the golden gates or the angels I always imagined. Instead, I plunged into darkness, where Lucifer himself revealed the truth about my soul. That moment changed everything, because hell isn't where God sends you. It's what you create when you hide behind pride and forget what it means to truly love. The night I died began like any other. I was alone in my little house, a one-story ranch tucked at the edge of a small town no one would think twice about. The TV hummed in the background, a rerun of some old sitcom I wasn't really watching, and the familiar weight of the Bible rested in my lap. I was thumbing through the Psalms, searching for a verse to steady the unease that had crept into my chest over the past few days. My life wasn't flashy, but I believed it was solid. I had raised two boys who were now grown and gone, buried a husband who left too soon, and built a life centered around God, or so I thought. The first sharp pain came like a sudden flicker of light, a jolt under my ribcage. I winced, clutching my chest, but I dismissed it as indigestion. I had been eating too much salty food again, a bad habit from my teaching days. But the pain returned, deeper, heavier, spreading like a wildfire across my chest and up my neck. My vision blurred, and a cold sweat prickled my forehead. I tried to call for help, but the phone was just out of reach on the kitchen counter. My body folded, sliding from the chair to the floor, and I felt my heart hammering like it was trying to escape my chest. Then, just as quickly, everything stopped. The pain, the sounds, the world. My last conscious thought was a prayer, something simple, something desperate. God save me. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in my home. The room, the smell of old furniture, the muffled noise of the TV, all of it was gone. In its place was darkness, thick and all-consuming, the kind you feel more than see. My first thought was that I had survived, that maybe I'd just passed out and was dreaming. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized this wasn't a dream. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, filled with a low hum that vibrated in my bones. It was the sound of countless voices, murmuring, crying, whispering things I couldn't understand. The ground beneath my feet felt soft, almost like ash, and there was an unbearable heat that pressed against my skin, though no flames were visible. Panic set in as I stumbled forward, calling out into the void. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, someone help me." My voice cracked, echoing back to me in a way that made the space feel infinite and suffocating all at once. Then I saw it, a faint glow far in the distance, flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. I stumbled toward it, the only thing that seemed real in this abyss. As I moved closer, the glow grew brighter, revealing a landscape that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a wasteland, barren and lifeless, with jagged rocks jutting out like broken teeth. Rivers of molten fire cut through the ground, bubbling and hissing with an unnatural intensity. And then I heard them, the screams. They weren't just distant cries. They were everywhere, coming from the rocks, the rivers, the very air around me. Each one carried a kind of pain I had never known, raw and unending. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, trying to shut it all out. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This can't be real. God, where are you? Please help me." But as the words left my lips, they felt hollow, like they didn't belong in this place. That's when I felt it, a presence, powerful and ancient, standing just behind me. I turned and there he was, Lucifer. He didn't look like the devil I'd imagined in Sunday school, with horns and a pitchfork. No, this was something far worse. He was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural, with features that were sharp and perfect, but his eyes were endless voids that seemed to pull the very breath from my lungs. He smiled, not a kind smile, but one that carried a quiet menace, like he already knew every thought I'd ever had. "Martha," he said, his voice smooth and calm, like a preacher delivering a sermon. "Welcome." My legs gave out completely, and I collapsed to the ground. No, I choked out. This isn't real. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a good person. I followed God. Lucifer tilted his head, studying me like I was some fascinating creature. Did you? He asked, his tone almost mocking. Tell me, Martha, what makes you so sure? His words hit me like a blow, but I refused to break. I went to church every Sunday. I read my Bible. I prayed every day. I did everything I was supposed to do. He crouched down so we were eye level, his presence overwhelming. Uh, yes, he said softly. You followed the rules. But tell me, Martha, was it God you were serving or yourself? I couldn't speak. His words pierced through me in a way that felt worse than the heat, worse than the screams. He stood, gesturing around us. Do you see this place? He asked. This isn't where God sends the wicked. This is where the self-righteous send themselves. No, I whispered, shaking my head. That's not true. I'm not like them. I lived a good life. I lived for appearances, he interrupted, his voice now sharper. You wore your faith like a mask, a shield to hide your pride, your judgment, your lack of compassion. Tell me, Martha, how many did you condemn while claiming to speak for God? I tried to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Memories began to surface, unbidden and relentless. The single mother at church I dismissed as lazy. The neighbor I gossiped about, hiding my cruelty behind concern. The countless times I had looked down on others, so certain I was better, so certain I was saved. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The truth of his words was crushing. I had built my faith on a foundation of pride, and now it was crumbling beneath me. Lucifer's voice softened again, though it carried no kindness. This is your hell, Martha. A mirror, a reflection of the life you chose to live. But don't despair, this is only the beginning. He gestured to the glowing rivers of fire and the shadows that moved within them. There's so much more for you to see. My body trembled, my mind unable to grasp the enormity of what was happening. But one thing was clear. Whatever this place was, it wasn't a mistake. I had fallen, not because of what others had done, but because of who I had become. As Lucifer turned and began to walk, his figure a silhouette against the fiery landscape, I knew I had no choice but to follow. I followed Lucifer, not because I wanted to, but because I felt I had no choice. The ground beneath my feet burned with every step, but there was nowhere else to go. The glow of the rivers cast long shadows, and the air was thick with the stench of sulfur and something metallic, like blood. My heart pounded in my chest as the screams grew louder, more desperate. I tried to block them out, but they seemed to come from every direction, pressing into my mind like 1,000 needles. Lucifer walked ahead of me, his movements unnaturally smooth, almost gliding across the jagged terrain. You're quiet, he said without turning around. I expected more protests, more defiance. But perhaps you're starting to understand. Understand what? I spat, my voice trembling. That you're a liar? That this is some cruel trick? He stopped suddenly, and I nearly stumbled into him. When he turned to face me, his expression was calm, almost amused. A liar, he repeated. Oh, Martha, I don't need to lie to you. The truth is far more effective. His gaze pierced me, and I felt as though he could see straight into my soul. But since you're so eager to believe this is a mistake, let me show you something. He raised a hand, and the air around us shimmered like ripples in water. I flinched as the landscape began to shift. The rivers of fire dimmed, the jagged rocks softened, and in their place emerged something painfully familiar, the sanctuary of my old church. The wooden pews, the pulpit, even the stained glass windows, it was all there, just as I remembered it. But something was wrong. The colors of the glass were muted, the air was stale, and the faint sound of whispers filled the room. I stood frozen in the aisle, my legs refusing to move. Why are we here? I whispered. Lucifer appeared beside me, his voice low and measured. This is the house of God you loved so dearly, is it not? The place where you sang his praises, where you judged and condemned in his name. I never. I started to protest, but he silenced me with a look. Come, he said, gesturing toward the front of the church. Let's take a closer look. Reluctantly, I followed him to the pulpit, my steps echoing in the empty space. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, forming words I didn't want to hear. She thinks she's better than us. Look at the way she glares, always judging. She talks about love, but where is it? All I see is pride. My stomach turned as I recognized the voices. They belonged to people I knew, members of the congregation I had spent years worshiping beside. Faces flashed in my mind. The young mother who struggled to keep her child quiet during the service, the man who smelled of alcohol, the teenager with the tattoos. I had dismissed them all, certain their flaws were greater than mine. No, I whispered, shaking my head. That's not true. I was trying to help them. I was doing what God wanted me to do. Lucifer chuckled softly. Were you? Let's see. He waved his hand again, and the scene shifted. I was standing in the church foyer, watching as the young mother wrestled with her crying baby. I remembered this moment vividly. She had come in late, her face red with embarrassment, the baby wailing in her arms. I had approached her, my expression calm, my words carefully chosen. You know, we have a nursery, I had said, my tone sweet but firm. Perhaps it would be easier for everyone if you used it. Her face had crumpled, but she nodded and walked away, the baby still crying. At the time, I had felt justified, even righteous. But now, as I watched the scene play out, I saw it differently. The woman's shoulders were slumped, her eyes filled with shame. I had offered no kindness, no understanding, only judgment cloaked in politeness. Stop it, I said, my voice rising. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was trying to help. Lucifer stepped closer, his presence suffocating. You told yourself that, he said. But the truth is, you cared more about appearances than about her pain. You wanted her gone because she disrupted your idea of a perfect service. Admit it, Martha. Tears burned in my eyes, but I shook my head. I didn't know, I whispered. I didn't realize. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Didn't you? The scene shifted again, and I was in the church parking lot, watching as a man stumbled toward the entrance. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the faint smell of alcohol lingered in the air. I had intercepted him at the door, my expression neutral but firm. Perhaps you should come back another time, I had said, when you're feeling better. The man had looked at me with such sadness, such disappointment, but he had turned and walked away without a word. At the time, I had convinced myself I was protecting the sanctity of the church, but now I saw the truth. I had turned him away because he didn't fit my image of a proper Christian. I had denied him the grace I claimed to believe in. My knees buckled, and I sank to the ground, my body shaking with sobs. I didn't know, I repeated. I didn't know. Lucifer knelt beside me, his voice low and unyielding. You didn't want to know. It was easier to judge, easier to push them away than to see them as they were, as you are. Flawed, broken, human. I looked up at him, my tears blurring his face. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice trembling. Why do you care? His expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that resembled pain. I don't care, he said quietly, but you should. You built your faith on pride, on appearances, and now it has brought you here. If you want to leave, you must confront the truth. All of it. I wanted to argue, to deny his words, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. I had spent my life building a facade of righteousness, hiding my flaws behind a mask of piety. And now, that mask had been torn away, leaving me exposed and raw. Lucifer stood, his gaze fixed on me. This is only the beginning, he said. There is more for you to see. As he turned and began to walk away, I forced myself to my feet, my body trembling but determined. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going, no matter how much it hurt. As I followed Lucifer deeper into the desolation, the ground beneath my feet began to shift. The ash and jagged rocks turned into something slick and unstable, as if I were walking on a surface that wasn't solid at all. I looked down and froze, my stomach twisting. Beneath my feet were faces, countless, shifting faces, pressing against the translucent ground. Their mouths opened and closed, screaming silently, their hands clawing at the barrier between us. Their expressions were a mix of agony and despair, and though I couldn't hear their voices, I felt the weight of their suffering in my chest. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucifer glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "These are the burdens you carried," he said simply. "Or, more accurately, the burdens you placed on others." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't. This isn't right. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Lucifer's gaze sharpened, and he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "Didn't you? Every word, every action, every time you chose judgment over kindness, you left a mark. These are the people you wounded with your pride, your condemnation, your refusal to see them as anything more than sinners unworthy of grace." I couldn't look at the faces anymore. They pressed against the barrier with such desperation, their hands stretching out as if they could reach me, pull me down into their torment. "I didn't mean to," I said weakly. "I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing what was right." Lucifer's expression softened slightly, though there was no kindness in it. "Intentions don't matter here," he said. "Only the truth." The ground beneath me shifted again, and I found myself standing in a strange, gray void. The oppressive heat of the wasteland was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy stillness. I realized I was holding something, a massive stone, rough and jagged, with the word pride carved deeply into its surface. It was so heavy that my arms trembled under its weight, my shoulders burning with the effort to hold it. I looked around, desperate for an explanation. "What is this?" I asked. Lucifer appeared beside me, his movements slow and deliberate. "Your pride," he said simply. "The burden you carried in life, though you never realized it. It shaped your actions, your words, your very soul. Now you will carry it here." "I can't," I said, my voice trembling as the weight threatened to crush me. "It's too much." He smiled faintly, but there was no pity in his expression. "You carried it easily enough before," he said. "Now you'll understand the cost." The ground beneath my feet shifted again, and I was no longer alone. Around me were figures, shadows of people I recognized. Some were from my church, others from my community, even strangers whose faces I had forgotten, but whose pain I had caused. They were reaching out to me, their hands grasping, their voices pleading. "Help me," one of them said, a young woman I vaguely remembered from church. "Please, I'm so tired." I tried to step toward her, but the weight of the stone held me back. It dragged at me, pulling me to my knees. "I can't," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I can't help you." Her face twisted in anguish, and she turned away, fading into the gray void. Another figure approached, this one a man who had once been my neighbor. He had struggled with addiction, and I had dismissed him as a lost cause, a man too far gone for redemption. "You could have helped me," he said, his voice raw and broken. "But you didn't. You looked at me and saw my sin, not my pain." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but the weight of the stone pressed down on me, stealing my breath. "I didn't know how," I whispered. "I didn't know what to do." "You could have tried," he said, "but you didn't." One by one, the figures came to me, each one a reminder of the times I had chosen judgment over compassion, condemnation over grace. Each one added to the weight of the stone until I was lying on the ground, crushed beneath it. "Why are you doing this to me?" I cried, my voice echoing in the empty space. "What do you want from me?" Lucifer crouched beside me, his expression unreadable. "This isn't about what I want," he said. "This is about what you need to see. You built your life on a foundation of pride, and now you are feeling the weight of it. But the choice is still yours. What choice? I asked, my voice barely audible. To let it go, he said simply. To set down the burden you've carried for so long. But you can't do that until you face the truth. All of it. I closed my eyes, the tears spilling down my cheeks. The truth was unbearable, a searing pain that cut deeper than anything I had ever known. I had spent my life believing I was righteous, that I was doing God's work, but now I saw the cracks in that facade. I had hurt people. I had pushed them away, dismissed their pain. And in doing so, I had separated myself from the very grace I claimed to believe in. As I opened my eyes, I saw one last figure approaching. It was me, but not the version of myself I recognized. This version of me was younger, unburdened, and her expression was one of quiet sorrow. You can let it go, she said, her voice soft but steady. You don't have to carry it anymore. I don't know how, I said, my voice breaking. You start by admitting the truth, she said. Not just to yourself, but to God, to the people you've hurt. You can't move forward until you let go of the past. I looked down at the stone, the weight of it crushing me. For the first time, I realized that it wasn't just a burden, it was a part of me, a reflection of everything I had refused to confront. And in that moment, I understood what I needed to do. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not a recitation of verses, not a plea for deliverance, but an honest, raw cry from the depths of my soul. God, forgive me, I said. I see it now. I see what I've done, who I've been. I don't want to carry this anymore. Please help me. The stone began to crack, the weight lifting slightly. It wasn't gone, not yet, but for the first time, I felt the possibility of release. When I opened my eyes, Lucifer was standing beside me, his expression unreadable. This is only the beginning, he said. There is more to see. I nodded, the tears still flowing freely. I wasn't ready, but I knew I couldn't stop. The journey wasn't over yet. The cracked stone had not yet disappeared, but its weight was lighter as I rose shakily to my feet. The void around me began to shift again, its cold grayness replaced by an oppressive darkness. Lucifer stood beside me, a silent figure whose presence I couldn't ignore. The air grew thick, charged with an electric tension that made my skin prickle. I didn't know where we were headed, but the sinking feeling in my stomach told me that the worst was yet to come. This place isn't just about what you've done, Lucifer said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the suffocating silence. It's about why you've done it. I turned to him, my legs still trembling. I told you, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was following God. He raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk curling his lips. You've told yourself that story so many times, you almost believe it. But let's strip it down to what's real, shall we? The darkness around us began to ripple, and I suddenly found myself standing in my childhood home. The sight of it was so vivid, so unexpected, that it knocked the breath out of me. The wallpaper was faded, the furniture worn but familiar. I recognized the creak in the floorboards as I shifted my weight, the faint smell of my mother's perfume lingering in the air. It was exactly as I remembered. Why are we here? I whispered. Lucifer stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. Go ahead. Take a look. My heart pounded as I approached the doorway. Inside, I saw myself, or at least a younger version of me, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the couch with my mother. She was reading from the Bible, her voice steady and warm as she explained a passage about forgiveness. You see, Martha, she said gently, God's love is a gift. It's not something we earn by being perfect. We don't deserve it, but he gives it to us anyway because that's who he is. Yummy nodded, her face serious. But what about people who do bad things? Don't they get punished? My mother's expression softened, and she placed a hand on my shoulder. Sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes hurt others. But forgiveness doesn't mean we ignore what they've done. It means we choose to let go of the anger in our hearts. That's how we show God's love to others. I remembered that moment clearly now, though I hadn't thought about it in years. It was one of the few times my mother had spoken so openly about her faith. At the time, I had clung to her words, eager to understand. But somewhere along the way, that lesson had been twisted into something else. The scene shifted again, and I was a teenager sitting in the back pew of the church. My father had just left us, and my mother was trying to hold everything together. I watched as she wept quietly during the service, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. I remembered feeling a strange mix of anger and shame, not at her, but at the situation, at the vulnerability she showed so openly. I had vowed then and there that I would never let myself be that weak, that exposed. You learned the wrong lesson, Lucifer said from behind me, his tone almost sympathetic. You built walls around your heart, told yourself it was strength. But all it did was cut you off from others, from grace, even from God. I clenched my fists, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I was trying to survive, I said, my voice trembling. I thought I had to be strong. You thought strength meant control, he replied. You thought if you followed the rules perfectly, you could force God to love you, force life to be fair. But faith doesn't work that way. The darkness rippled again, and I was suddenly standing in a different church, much smaller and more humble. This one was familiar, too. It was where I had gone as a young adult, where I had first started teaching Sunday school. I saw myself standing at the front of the room, leading a group of children in a lesson about obedience. God loves those who follow his commandments, I heard myself say, my voice confident and firm. If we want to go to heaven, we have to live good, clean lives, and stay away from sin. The children nodded solemnly, absorbing my words like sponges. At the time, I had been proud of the way I taught them, certain I was doing God's work. But now, watching the scene unfold, I felt a pang of regret. My words had been well-intentioned, but they had reduced God's love to a transaction, a reward for good behavior, rather than an unearned gift. You taught them what you believed, Lucifer said, his voice low, that God's love was something to be earned. And in doing so, you passed your burden on to them. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't mean to. I thought I was helping. Lucifer's gaze was unrelenting. Your intentions don't erase the harm you caused. You took the grace your mother tried to show you and twisted it into something rigid, something cold. And you did it because it made you feel safe, because you were afraid. The weight of his words was unbearable, and I fell to my knees, sobbing. I didn't know how else to be, I said. I thought I was doing the right thing. For yourself, maybe, he said, but not for others. I stayed there, kneeling in the cold, empty church, as the truth settled over me like a heavy shroud. I had spent my life trying to control everything, my faith, my actions, even the way others saw me, because I was too afraid to face my own vulnerability. I had turned faith into a checklist, a way to keep the world at bay, and in doing so, I had lost the very heart of it. After what felt like an eternity, I looked up at Lucifer, my voice hoarse. What do I do now? He studied me for a long moment before speaking. You let go, he said. You stop trying to control, to justify, to protect yourself with walls of pride and judgment. You open your heart, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully understood. All I knew was that I couldn't keep going the way I had been. Something had to change. Lucifer gestured for me to rise, and I did, though my legs were shaky. Come, he said. There's more to see. The scene dissolved around us, the church fading back into darkness. But this time, the void felt different, less oppressive, less cold. For the first time since my journey began, I felt a flicker of hope. It was small and fragile, but it was there. And I knew I had to follow it, wherever it led. The darkness around me lifted slowly, not into light, but into something gray and muted, like a fog had settled over the world. I could barely see a few steps ahead, but I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel Lucifer's presence beside me, steady and unyielding, though I didn't dare turn to look at him. My legs were heavy, my body worn down from everything I had already seen, but I kept moving forward because stopping felt impossible. As the fog began to thin, I found myself standing in a familiar place, my old classroom. The chalkboard stretched across the wall, The desks were neatly arranged in rows, and the faint smell of dry erase markers lingered in the air. For a moment, I almost felt comforted. This was my sanctuary for so many years, the place where I had felt most in control, most certain of myself. But the room was different now. The desks were occupied, but not by children. Instead, the faces staring back at me were older, worn, and filled with an accusatory silence. I recognized them immediately. These were people I had known throughout my life. The single mother from church, the neighbor I had dismissed, even the man I had turned away from the church door because he smelled of alcohol. Their gazes bore into me, and I felt my chest tighten with guilt. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why are they here?" Lucifer stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "This is your final lesson," he said. "You spent your life teaching others, guiding them, or so you thought. Now it's time for you to be the student." The man I had turned away rose from his seat, his eyes locked on mine. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "You told me to come back when I was better, when I was good enough." I swallowed hard, the memory flashing vividly in my mind. "I thought I was protecting the church," I said weakly. "I didn't want to cause a scene." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You didn't see me," he said, his voice cracking. "You didn't see my pain, my desperation. I came to that church because I thought it might be my last chance to find hope, to find God. And you turned me away." Tears burned my eyes, and I reached out instinctively, though he didn't take my hand. "I didn't know," I said. "I didn't realize." "But you should have," he replied. "You claimed to follow Christ, to love as he loved. But where was that love when I needed it?" His words cut through me, sharper than any blade. I tried to respond, to explain, but no words came. He stepped back, his seat creaking as he sat down again, and another figure stood. It was the young mother, her face etched with a sadness I couldn't bear to look at. "I tried so hard," she said, her voice trembling, "to keep my baby quiet, to fit in, to do everything right. But it was never enough for you, was it?" My throat tightened, and I shook my head. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I thought I was helping you." "Helping," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You weren't helping. You were judging. You saw my struggles and dismissed me. You didn't offer kindness or support. You offered rejection, wrapped in a smile." Her words brought a fresh wave of tears, and I fell to my knees, the weight of their accusations crushing me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Lucifer watched silently, his gaze unrelenting as one by one, the others stood and spoke their truths. Each one brought a new wave of pain, a deeper understanding of the harm I had caused. I had built my life on the belief that I was good, that I was righteous, but now I saw the cracks in that foundation. I had failed so many people, not because I didn't care, but because I had cared more about appearances, about control, than about truly loving them. When the last person sat down, the silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't bring myself to stand, couldn't even lift my head. "What now?" I whispered. "How do I make this right?" Lucifer crouched beside me, his expression unreadable. "You can't," he said simply. "Not for them. The harm has been done, and there is no undoing it." His words felt like a blow, and I closed my eyes, the despair threatening to consume me. "Then what's the point of all this?" I asked. "If I can't fix what I've done, why show me?" "Because you still have a choice," he said. "You can carry this with you forever, let it define you, or you can let it go. You can undo the past, but you can choose what to do with the truth." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. "How do I let it go?" His expression softened slightly, though it carried no warmth. "You start by forgiving yourself, by accepting that you are flawed, that you've made mistakes, and by choosing to live differently moving forward." The room began to dissolve around us, the figures fading into shadows. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, though the guilt still lingered, a quiet reminder of the work I had yet to do. As the fog thickened, I found myself standing on a narrow bridge suspended over a vast chasm. The air was cold, the wind howling around me, and I could see no end to the bridge on either side. "This is your path," Lucifer said from behind me. "It will not be easy, and it will not be without pain, but it is yours to walk." I turned to him, my voice steady despite the fear in my heart. "And if I fall," he tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips, "then you get back up. That's the only way forward." I looked ahead, the bridge swaying beneath my feet. The chasm below was dark and endless, a reminder of everything I had faced, everything I had learned. But the faintest light glimmered in. The distance, a beacon calling me forward. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the bridge, one foot in front of the other. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, precious thing I couldn't afford to lose. As I stepped onto the bridge, the cold wind bit at my skin, and the entire structure swayed under my weight. The chasm below stretched into infinity, its darkness a yawning reminder of the consequences I had barely escaped. Each step was hesitant, my feet testing the planks to make sure they would hold. Every creak, every groan of the wood sent a shiver down my spine, but I kept moving. The faint light ahead was my only guide, a beacon that pulled me forward even as fear whispered for me to stop. The bridge seemed endless, and time became meaningless. Was I walking for minutes? Hours? It felt as though the journey itself was a test, each step forcing me to confront the memories of what I had done. Faces swirled in the darkness, accusations and tears blending into a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. That light was my only chance, my only hope. "Do you think this will be enough?" Lucifer's voice cut through the wind, startling me. I hadn't realized he was still with me. He walked behind me, his steps unnervingly steady, his presence a reminder that my trial wasn't over. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You've seen the truth of your life, faced the consequences of your choices. But do you truly believe that will change anything? That you can leave this place and suddenly become someone else?" I clenched my jaw, the words striking a nerve. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I have to try." He smirked, his expression unreadable. "Trying is a start, but it's not enough. Change requires more than effort. It requires sacrifice." "What more do I have to give?" I asked, the frustration boiling over in my voice. "I've given everything. I've faced everything." Lucifer stopped, his gaze piercing. "You've faced the consequences of your actions. But have you faced yourself? The real you? Not the mask, not the image you've built, but the raw, flawed, human soul beneath." I froze, his words slicing through me. I thought I had already faced the truth, but now I realized there was a part of me I had been avoiding, even now. The part that wasn't just about what I had done to others, but about what I had done to myself. The pride, the fear, the desperate need for control. It wasn't just about protecting my image. It was about protecting my heart, my fragile, wounded heart that I had buried under layers of self-righteousness and denial. The bridge beneath me began to shift, the planks creaking louder, the wind howling with a ferocity that forced me to grip the ropes on either side. The light ahead flickered, as if testing my resolve. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me again, threatening to crush me as it had before. "I'm afraid," I whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. "Good," Lucifer said, his voice calm. "Fear means you're alive. Fear means you still have something to lose." I took another step, then another, each one harder than the last. The memories didn't fade. They grew sharper, more vivid. The faces of the people I had hurt, the choices I had made, the walls I had built, they surrounded me, a storm of regret and shame. But as the storm raged, I realized something. I wasn't powerless. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to carry it. The light ahead grew brighter, and I could see the end of the bridge now, a solid platform waiting for me. It wasn't heaven, not the golden gates or the shining angels I had imagined, but it was warm, and the air felt alive with something I couldn't quite name. hope maybe, grace. As I stepped onto the platform, the storm behind me began to quiet. The bridge disappeared, leaving only the solid ground beneath my feet. I turned to face Lucifer, who stood at the edge, his expression unreadable. So, this is it? I asked. This is where I leave you? He nodded slowly. For now. But remember, Martha, I'm not the enemy you think I am. I'm a reflection, a guide, a reminder of the truth you'd rather avoid. You'll see me again, if not here, then in the choices you make. I swallowed hard, his words lingering in the air. I didn't know if I believed him, but I couldn't deny the truth in what he had shown me. As much as I wanted to hate him, I realized I couldn't. He wasn't my savior, but he wasn't my tormentor either. He was simply there. The light grew brighter, and I felt its warmth envelop me. It wasn't a blinding, overwhelming light. It was soft, gentle, like the first rays of dawn after a long, cold night. It seeped into my skin, my bones, filling the cracks I hadn't even realized were there. And then I woke up. The sterile smell of the hospital hit me first, followed by the steady beep of machines. My body felt heavy, my chest aching, but I was alive. I blinked, my vision adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse stood nearby, her expression one of relief as she noticed I was awake. "You're back," she said softly. "We thought we'd lost you for a while there." I didn't have the strength to respond, but tears filled my eyes. I was back, alive, given a second chance. The days that followed were slow and painful. My body was weak, my mind overwhelmed by everything I had experienced. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I couldn't go back to who I was. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I had to live differently. Not for appearances, not for control, but for love, for grace, for the God I had claimed to follow, but had never truly understood. When I was finally strong enough to leave the hospital, I went back to the places I had avoided for so long. The single mother at church, the neighbor I had dismissed, even the man I had turned away, they were still there, still living their lives, and I approached each of them with a heart full of humility and a simple apology. Some forgave me, some didn't, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I tried, that I faced the truth and chose to move forward, step by step. The light I had seen on that bridge, it wasn't heaven, it was hope. It was the reminder that redemption wasn't about perfection, but about the willingness to keep walking, even when the path seemed impossible. And so I walked, one step at a time, into the light,